Hey, Brian Losa here with Priority One Fishing. This is one that we have been receiving some requests for. This is Burbot. Some of you call them eelpout, the lawyer fish, freshwater lingcod, some of the tastiest fish under the ice, some of the most unusual fish you can actually fish for under the ice. So we're going to show you a few techniques on how to catch these fish, from jigging techniques to tip-ups and stationary dead stick rods, as well as structural elements on where to find them. So let's start with that. Let's start with structure. Now, these fish are not uncommon to following structural lines very similar to almost any other species that you target under the ice. Well, this time frame that we're actually catching these fish is during their spawn. These fish on this lake we're at will actually spawn up to 3 different waves as they come through these areas, and we're looking for those constriction points, those areas where it causes those fish to group up and come into those gravel bars and those edges where they will go through their spawning cycles. Now, 2 primary structural elements to look for would be gradients and drop-offs. Now, these drop-offs adjacent to points and primary points on the lake are some of the best for jigging techniques. Gradients, you may have to spread out a pretty good tip-up field, maybe sometimes the size of a football field, in order to find the travel routes of those fish. They can be very particular to those silt and gravel lines and where they like to go for their spawning cycles. So let's look at this point that we have right over here. So this point that we're looking at is really quite a steep drop-off. We're looking at 5 to 10 feet of water, literally 5 to 10 feet off of the bank, and then transitions off of a rocky edge where we're going to see some talus piles of some of those rocks and some of those boulders that have tapered down or fell down into that basin. Now, those edges are where those fish are looking for. Also, being a primary point, these fish have to cross that point to get from point A to point B. Now, this can be a very structurally consistent element you'll see in this body of water that we're in, but you'll see it across the ice belt and bodies of water that have eelpout, that have burbot in them, and you can find fish on these very consistently. Now, their comfort zones, these fish like that real cold water temperature. Their spawning cycles are right around 35-degree water temperature. They are a voracious predator as well. So as they're coming through in these waves, they are scavenging and devouring almost anything they can get in their mouth. So don't be afraid to go big on your jig selections, and lots of noise. Now, they're a very light-sensitive fish. These fish essentially are a big giant swimming tongue. So they're going to feel the bait before they see the bait. But light can give you some options to drive those fish and kind of get them in that strike zone to begin with, and then it's up to you to get that trigger response with your jigging technique and with the bait selection that you've chosen. So other methods, let's take a look at, besides jigging, let's take a look at tip-ups. Now, tip-ups are often used for those big gradients. So if we have those gradients out there, like a shallow flat, say a gravel field that extends maybe 30 or 40 yards, and you see less than a 5-foot depth change. That's what we're talking about on those shallow gradients. Now, finding the travel route of these fish and how they come across those areas can be difficult unless you are finding that dead bait option in position for those fish, or putting that dead bait option in position for those fish to find if they're coming out of deep water into shallow water, or they're coming from shallow into deep, and they're crossing certain edges across that gradient. So edges, yes, you do have edges on those gradients. These might only be a foot to a 2-foot drop, often caused by water level decreases and water level rising. And so as the water in these lakes decrease, and they drop that water level down, you're going to see these edges caused by waves that create a new shoreline, essentially. It separates sediment. You'll see gravel, you'll see silt, you'll see those edges, and then the water levels fill back up and cover them up. Well, they're still there, and that's what those fish are relating to in this sense. So voracious predators, they'll take those jigs like crazy, but they will take a tip-up like crazy as well. So don't be afraid to go big on your tip-ups. You're looking at a big profile, something that those fish can see from a range, they can smell it. You're looking at very natural type of a sense and attractants that you're putting on those. Everything from crayfish to shrimp to night crawlers even can pick up these fish. We often use sucker meat or chub meat as well out here to be able to pick them up. Now, very close to the bottom also. These fish don't like to move up off the bottom. Very light sensitive fish again. They are attracted to small amounts of light, and when you're targeting, try to modify or moderate the amount of light that you have on the ice so that you're not just attracting fish to an illuminated ice cap, but to your actual bait presentation, especially if you're presenting a glow jig or a glow tube jig, for example, for these fish to pick up. So, big baits. I'm fishing, some of these baits are 6-7 inches long. Even a smaller burbot in that 17, 18 inch range can swallow one of those with very little effort. So don't be afraid to go big on these baits. Not only are you allowing them to smell the bait, but you're also allowing them to see that bait when they get close enough and in proximity to be able to pick that up. So pretty much that's about it for catching burbot. Some of the rigs I like to do are very, very heavy rigs, a 1/4 of an ounce, maybe the lightest I'll ever go to. On these tip-ups, I'm fishing sometimes as heavy as 3/4 of an ounce to an ounce. Now there's a couple of modifications that you can do on these tip-ups to actually help with that. The shaft on a standard tip-up, as it goes down into the water, can be angled slightly to increase the actual strike tension and also help prevent from wind tripping that flag without you wanting to, having those false alarms go off. But for that heavy bait, it's almost necessary to be able to hold that bait in position 5 or 6 inches off the bottom of the lake where these burbot are feeding. Make sure you are on the bottom. Now some of these edges and some of these points that we're fishing on, you may find rock piles, and even in, like, say, an 8-inch hole, we've had occasions where we'll move the bait 2 inches to the side, still in the same hole, and have it fall another 2 feet. So make sure you're on the bottom. These fish like to get right down in those rocks. That's how you're catching them. You got to be right in that strike zone, and once you get that bait presented to those fish correctly, they're very willing to take it. Now, dark, we're fishing at night, so these fish, again, very, very light sensitive fish, and that's why we're fishing at night. These fish tend to go on the prowl. This is when they're doing their hunting, and also when they're doing their spawning cycles this time of year. So you can pick them up most of the time through the ice from mid-January all the way through February. As you're going to see these fish slow down as they get through those final waves of the spawn cycle in February. But as we're sitting out here in mid-January right now, these fish are very active. They're on that first, maybe even second wave. We have lots of fish coming into lots of points. So get out there, see if you can catch a few of these fish. Burbot, excellent tasting fish. We're going to see if we can show a couple of recipes eventually on this species. So this is Brian Losey again with Priority One Fishing, chasing burbot here on Flaming Gorge, Utah. Get out there and catch you a few of those fish.